A day after his surprise visit to Kyiv, President Biden delivered a speech in Poland today accusing Russia of crimes against humanity and reaffirming the United States' commitment to Ukraine. The president's speech came hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia would suspend its participation in the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START. Where might this be leading? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Dan Bishop. He is a member of the House Homeland Security Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, and the Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. He represents North Carolina's 8th Congressional District. Congressman Bishop, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony. Glad to be with you today.
Well, let me just start with this. Your reaction to the president's comments today and Russian President Vladimir Putin's announcement.
Well, look, I think we are moving, as we have been for some time in Ukraine, to a very dangerous position. I think that the notion that, I can remember from college when they taught us about the danger of encircling Russia, the Soviet Union, why that was a bad policy. It seems to me that there is sort of a headlong rush to do that, a lack of consideration for what the ultimate consequences may be. And I believe that Putin's responses are predictable. And I think the answer that President Biden hasn't given us is, what is the objective that is consistent with American interests? How do we ensure that we don't end up triggering World War III in the process? And I just think that the answer hasn't yet been forthcoming. I hope that I think in this Congress, as Kevin McCarthy has said, there's no more blank checks. We're into Ukraine for over $100 billion, and we're going to have to see some accountability and some answers, some off-ramps, some exit strategies that make sense for the national security of the United States.
So, Congressman, do you think the president's trip to Kyiv, his statements there in Poland today, is this administration provoking Biden, provoking Putin, rather?
Well, I mean, if you were, can you think of a way that you would do anything that would have a greater effect to that extent? It seems unwise in the extreme to me. It does seem that you constantly have pushed Putin to the limits. In fact, some have said, what if Putin were replaced? What if, that Russia suffered such an extraordinary defeat and embarrassment in Ukraine, utter defeat there, and Putin were taken out of power? Would that be better for the United States? I mean, don't get me wrong, Tony. He's not a great guy. He's been very, very bad, very brutal. But who comes after him? The United States needs to be concerned about that. Are we better off with Libya, with Gaddafi being killed, and that country having been a chaos ever since, if you consider that on a continental scale, like Russia? Well, so I think the positions have been fairly reckless there.
Yeah, especially since our military policy since the Korean War has moved to containment as opposed to outright victory in so many of these places. I want to switch topics, Congressman, to the WHO, the World Health Organization. They're going to be meeting next week. And there is what they call a global accord. It looks like a treaty. It certainly has the effect of a treaty. And it's been negotiated, it's been worked out, it's going to be presented to the 192 member nations. This, as I read it, this allows the World Health Organization to declare a global pandemic and then take over how member nations respond to this. This looks like a threat to national sovereignty.
Tony, about a year ago, about last May, June, somewhere in that time frame, there were suggestions about amending the international health regulations, I believe they call them, a group of internal regulatory provisions governing the World Health Organizations. This seems like a continuation of the effort that was involved there, except as if that it is more extreme. A lot of folks I've had people contact me already about this. I've joined Chip Roy's bill for the United States to exit the World Health Organization. I don't think we ought to be a member. I certainly don't believe the President of the United States or his administration ought to be suggesting ceding any of American sovereign authority to the World Health Organization. And that is, there's a lot of language in this document, if it had the force of a treaty, that seems to be headed in that direction. One assurance that I would offer people, my understanding, my view of it, and understanding of a legal view, is it would have no effect without ratification by 2/3 of the United States Senate, which I don't anticipate. I do know, however, that President Biden has, in multiple occasions, exercised or purported to exercise authority that he lacked, and I wouldn't be surprised if he'd use something like that to do that again. I think about the vaccine mandates the United States Supreme Court said he didn't have the power to do. So this is beyond his authority, but it is a great shame, I think, upon the office of the presidency that so often he has attempted by executive order to exercise authority that is not his under the Constitution.
Well, according to the document, it would allow for provisional implementation so that it will go into effect. Everyone will act like it's effect, even if it is not ratified by the various countries. So it's almost as if you have to opt out of it as opposed to opting into it. They've become very crafty in the way that they construct these agreements.
It's very true, and there is such a thing, Tony, as an executive agreement. Presidents can enter into agreements with foreign nations on proper subjects and within a certain scope of subject matter that will be effective during their administration. So in theory, maybe the Biden administration could concede that this agreement that have some authority, even if the United States Senate hasn't ratified it as a treaty. I think there are many other reasons, including the same reasons that President Biden couldn't declare a vaccine mandate across the country, that would preclude him from entering into an executive agreement on this sort of subject matter, purporting to bind the United States, purporting to bind state governments, which is where that authority reposes. Right. So don't think he can do it, but as we've sort of our comments have indicated, this is a phenomenon we're seeing over and over again, the exertion of authority by a president who lacks it.
Where you have a divided Congress, the Republicans having the House, the Democrats control of the Senate, I think this would fall to the states to fight it, as they have fought much of this administration's overreach, would it not?
Yeah, I think what you'd have to see, Tony, and this is not very comforting, frankly, but you'd probably see, if this thing were done, if actions were taken in the name of it, purporting to bind folks, you'd see attorneys general of states across the country step up and bring litigation, and then you rely on the courts for the protection. Thank goodness for the United States Supreme Court, but if that had a change of personnel, we'd be in real trouble.
Final question before you go back. I guess I should have asked this to begin with. When we're thinking about giving the World Health Organization all this power and authority to basically be the medical police in a self-declared pandemic, how did WHO do with the COVID pandemic?
They did horribly. They did horribly, and the United States public health sector did horribly as well. And both of those, it would be amazing to me. You would imagine after the experiences that we've had, those folks would be licking their wounds and trying to figure out what went wrong, rather than grabbing for still more power to cause more debacles in the event we have a problem like COVID in the future. Yeah. But they never seem to learn. They only know how to double down in grabbing for power. More
power. That's what it's all about. In favor of the medical police, it'd be more like the Keystone Cops. Congressman Dan Bishop, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to see you, Tony.